When the economy started to really slow down and fell into recession in some places like Europe, the U.S. was supported to an extent by a huge cost of living adjustment in fixed income like Social Security, as well as other forms of wage increases in early 2023 that were an attempt to make up for the past price increases. But it was never enough. But it was enough at that time that consumers were like, even though they complained about lost purchasing power, they continued to spend because they thought, well, I'll get a raise next year that might be just as big. And as consumer price changes slow down, I might actually get back all of that purchasing power that I lost. I just need to hang in there a little bit. So I'll just continue along as I was beforehand. But as 2023 wore on and the labor market you started to see lack of hiring, you see unemployment start to rise because of the lack of hiring, suddenly people began to get the idea that I thought I was going to be made whole if the labor market continued to be robust. I'd continue to get wage gains. If I didn't like the job I was in, I could go someplace else and get paid a whole ton more. I would find my way back to get back all of that purchasing power that was lost. But as the labor market slowed down because the nominal economy slowed down, as businesses started to look at their cost structure and what they were really selling, they stopped hiring people. They stopped giving wages like they did before. The entire balance of the labor market shifted to employers, and they know it. Return to office policies that were implemented as a way to circumvent layoffs. The labor market completely changed. And for most consumers, what they felt was, I lost all that purchasing power. I thought I was going to get it back. But now that pathway for me get back that lost purchasing power seems to be closing down. So I not only fell behind, now it looks like I'm never going to be able to catch up. And that's what we've been hearing all year so far, is that consumers are really, pessimism has been rising, not because price changes or inflation has been reignited, but because they realize that there is a permanent impoverishment that goes along with this transition out of the supply shock era into where we're going, reversion to volume. So the labor market has led to other changes in the economy around the edges. It hasn't been, something like 2008 where everything just falls off all at once. It's been a little bit here, a little bit there. The media has called it a vibe session because people feel like it's a recession, even though some of the main statistics don't look that way. Like I said, lack of hiring is a recession. That's what triggers it. Some people, I've called it a half recession because of the lack of hiring. That's the first part. Some people have said it's a rolling recession because you have certain parts contract while others are growing, and then others start contracting, and then there's a back and forth. It doesn't seem to want to synchronize into a familiar format of what we would all recognize as a recession. But in fact, all of the pieces are there, and they're starting to slowly begin to not just bubble up from the surface, but actually synchronize and align in that fashion. So that's what central banks are responding to. That's what businesses are responding to. And that's what consumers are responding to from different perspectives. But it all adds up to basically the same thing.
Do you think this is sort of going back to the mean where we were before 2019, or maybe even just after COVID, or do you think this is sort of something that's going to go even further down as these recessionary trends permeate throughout the economy?
Well, it's tough that's always hard to tell. I start always looking at the curves in the bond market, fixed income futures, that type of thing. Like, what do the curves say? They don't tell you exactly what the future is. I mean, they never really have that type of forecasting ability anyway. So there's always ambiguity in everything. But by and large, what the markets have been saying this entire time, going back to 2021, early part of 2022, the inversions in the curves, swap spreads becoming increasingly negative, especially last summer into this year. What that says is that the market is prepared for a bunch of scenarios, whatever those may be, that lead to a longer term future where interest rates are low and stay low. And that can mean a number of things, but not a whole lot, not a big number of things. And what that essentially means is, like you were just saying, Anthony, is that interest rates that are low and stay low is an economic landscape that looks a lot like the 2010s, sadly and unfortunately. It doesn't look like a robust recovery or what many people were thinking about back in 2021, certainly. But what it says is that growth and inflation expectations are incredibly low, and they're likely to stay there, with the emphasis not on the inflation part, but on the growth part. And so what we've seen develop in the markets, as well as in these macroeconomic statistics, if one payroll report or another doesn't make a difference, you've seen the slowdown. We see the nominal slowdown in incomes. We've seen consumer pessimism that's consistent with a recession. And so it looks like the economy and all the data that we have coming in, or the vast majority of it, certain outliers aside, is moving in that direction. It's moving in the direction of, if A was the supply shock where everything looked good because of the price illusion, and B is something like the 2010s, you can tell we're moving in that direction. Now, how actually we get there, that's, completely up in the air. Does that mean a recession across the world? Does it mean a sharp, very deep recession? Does it mean maybe like Europe has been experiencing, where it's just it's a slow grinding year after year after year, no growth, which is a pretty substantial contraction in its own right? We don't really know exactly how we get to B, but the markets consistently say that we're heading toward B, where rates are going down and they're going to stay there, which is low growth and inflation expectations. And then everything that has happened over the last year, especially in the US labor market, which seemed to be one source of strength, continues to move in that direction. So it looks like the 2010 scenario might be the base case, and maybe it's the best case. We hope it's not the best case, but that seems to be where everything is heading, markets as well as macroeconomic data. And many places are already there. I mentioned Europe, Japan, Canada's another one heading in that same direction. And that's, like I said, that's why central bankers are cutting rates, because they can start to sense the exact same thing. And that's why central bankers are accelerating the rate cuts, because the weakness is becoming more and more apparent. And even if we don't know exactly how we get to that destination, that's really where everything seems to be. The weight of gravity in the entire global system is really heading. Because you think, wages have been good. It seemed like there were at least some decent employment opportunities. And then it's just been slowly turned off. And I think that's the biggest complaint that people have about the labor market. What's having such a big chilling effect across the economy is that, even like I said, the lack of hiring is a trigger for recession, because it has such a profound impact on everybody, from psychology on down. You think about, you're not exactly happy. Nobody's ever satisfied in the job that they have. And you think, well, I'll go out and find a new job. But then suddenly you see that nobody's hiring. And it's not just that you're no longer optimistic about not being able to find a new job. You also realize that as nobody else is hiring, you're kind of stuck where you are. But then where you are, managers and your bosses they're talking about, well, we're not meeting our numbers. Revenue growth isn't coming in. We have to control and cut our costs. And then you start thinking, okay, I don't like where I'm at. I can't go anyplace else because nobody's hiring. And my employer is starting to talk about cutting costs. What happens if I'm the one who loses hours? Or what happens, God forbid, I'm one who gets laid off? It's not just about those who lose their jobs, because it's really not about losing their jobs in the first part of it. And in this particular context, where we're coming off of these artificial distortions the last couple of years, it's potentially a much bigger deal, because not only are you closing down the labor market, there's lack of opportunity, potential for lost income. You also have to factor in the fact that, like I said before, the lost purchasing power. People are so much further behind than they were a couple years ago. And now that they know they're further behind, and now that they know that they're probably never going to catch up, that can lead to an even worse adjustment period, where we're talking about a real retrenchment in consumer spending, and leading to all sorts of negative consequences from that. And there's also the same thing from the business side too, because businesses realize, even those businesses that had done really well in 2021 and 2022, they realize, things were good a couple of years ago. We had tons of revenue growth. Automakers are a perfect example of this. It was really good for a while there. We got so much more revenue, even though we didn't sell as many cars. Now, without the revenue, it's like we don't have any work for these people to do.